Hey, since we're in the middle of an election, I thought it would be helpful to compare and contrast the key policy areas of President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. Look, my mantra for this election is this: we could see the largest swing in policy of our lifetimes. Ag, energy, healthcare, taxes, and much, much more. So prepare now for the changes or risk losing out. So in this video, we're going to discuss agriculture and rural policies. Over the time since George Floyd's death, the country has experienced just tremendous upheaval and protests. And this really is a seminal moment in our nation to change the way things have been to what we aspire them to be. While initially there were nights of violence and deaths, this has changed into peaceful protests aimed at creating change and positive change at that. So as a nation, we're looking with fresh eyes to what justice means for all of our citizens and what should be the relationship with those charged with keeping the peace. As well, the country is still navigating its way through a global pandemic and shutdown of our economy that devastated businesses and jobs. Now, all of this is occurring in the middle of an election, and that will have a dramatic impact on the results. So therefore, it's critical to understand the policies of the two candidates. And I'm starting with agriculture and rural policies because every one of us needs to eat and every one of us needs to rely on those people and businesses providing food. Now, the recent food shortages raised questions about our ability to feed the country during the crisis. And to state the obvious, the political and economic landscape has changed and continues to rapidly change during the pandemic and protests. And really, since the onset of the crisis, the Trump administration has been actively supporting U.S. agriculture sector with additional spending programs and a lot of executive orders. While hamstrung by not actively campaigning, Biden has supported the House-passed $3 trillion HEROES program, or Act, which contains additional agriculture spending. So at this point, we can safely state that both candidates support additional spending for both rural areas and agriculture and the agriculture sector. So with this in mind, here are the key takeaways for the two candidates. Number one, Biden and Trump take radically different approaches to regulation of land and water for agriculture use. And Biden's focus on sustainable farming and the Green New Deal, well, it may be misplaced with the current voter climate, although that's changing rapidly. Now, the issue of biofuels is surprisingly a contentious one, and policies have a greater impact than it would be expected if the energy markets continue to fluctuate wildly. And number three, both Biden and Trump propose to take a strong stance on trade with China to ensure that trade policy is enacted and supports and protects American farmers. So let's do a treetops view of the outcomes and their policies. And you can get more in-depth stuff on my website at andrewbush.com/research. Look, the pandemic has changed the landscape for agriculture and rural policies. And it also has changed the landscape really for everything else. And it's been instructive to see what policies were proposed prior to the outbreak and prior to the protests and what policies are being proposed today. So prior to the outbreak, Trump's policies did not provide a significant amount of economic stimulus for the agriculture sector, but his policies for removing waterway pollution restrictions and providing funding to offset the impacts of the trade war did have a positive impact on growth and profits for the industry. Now, the COVID-19 spending programs have significantly ramped up the amount of federal dollars flowing to the sector. Yet these programs were only in response to the economic shutdown and were necessary to maintain the nation's food supply. So really just kind of an offset there. Trump's previous budget proposals for reducing fundings for things such as crop insurance may have made crop insurance unaffordable for farmers and seriously undermine farm safety net and are now really seen as a non-starter. So we'll just take that off the table. I don't think they'll repropose them again. Now, should the U.S. and China Phase 1 trade agreement fall away, farmers will be severely negatively impacted given that agriculture exports from China fell from 15 billion to about 5 billion in 2018. And that side effect has really hurt the agriculture exports. Now, in addition, another partial side effect of the trade war was that the agriculture sector had record levels of debt in 2019 and the highest number of bankruptcies since 2011. Now, this was an increase of 24% over the previous year. In addition, Brookings Institution notes that with respect to the trade war, Washington needs a strategy that deals with China as it is, not as it hopes to be. And there will be little evidence the Trump administration is implementing such a plan, according to Brookings. Now, the Phase 1 deal was a means for Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping to pause their economic conflict, which served both domestic political interests on both sides. But in the big picture, its impact will be, again, pretty limited, according to Brookings. It's also difficult to know whether Trump's proposals for additional subsidies will help to alleviate these issues. One of the challenges of the subsidies already provided were at the highest level. I mean, these were already at the highest level in 14 years, and definitely not the normal by Farm Bureau Chief Economist John Newton, according to Axios. And prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, this would have raised some serious doubts as to the ability of the high subsidies to continue. But again, this appears to be a non-issue during these massive spending times. And really, during a $2 trillion spending and nobody cares about debt levels anymore, it's really a non-issue. All right, let's switch over to Biden really quickly. Before the outbreak, his plans and proposals were less negatively received by the industry in general, let's say. They also didn't appear to target areas of the rural economy that are mostly important to farmers. For example, introducing measures to support more sustainable farming may be neutral to positive in terms of long-term impact, but are not necessarily a high priority for the rural voting base. One of the issues with Biden's plans are that his goals are for net zero emissions in the agriculture sector, and that can result in delayed emission cuts and inefficient focus on developing negative emissions technologies, or insufficient. For example, soil storage simply delays the release of carbon and does not solve the issue, right? If you store it in plants, eventually it gets released. It simply pushes out the problem to a hopeful future in which really the appropriate carbon negative technology can exist, according to Carbon Brief. Ben Litteston from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy notes that these are the kinds of approaches that can get you only so far, but at some point you need to address the sources of the pollution, and you don't see that with this proposal. Now, on the flip side, Trump appears to have no policies relating to carbon reduction in the agriculture sector. So keep that in mind. However, the USDA stated in February that they aim to increase production in the sector by about 40% while cutting pollution from multiple aspects of the industry. The goals they have are reducing food waste by 50% by 2030, reducing water pollution from nutrient loss by 30% by 2050, and growing enough feedstock by 2050 to have biofuels constitute 30% of the nation's fuel supply, according to The Hill. But to achieve these goals, the USDA is going to focus on research, innovation, and improving the USDA's ability to collect data on farmers' conservation practices. So the details of this plan are still really unclear. I mean, really 2050, okay? The goal for the greenhouse gas reduction sets no specific target, of course, and that really isn't helpful. In addition, there are no repercussions for missing the benchmark, which means that the USDA cannot easily be held accountable for these goals. Okay, policies on biofuels are also important for the agriculture sector, which means that Biden's proposals for bio-based manufacturing and specifically biofuels may gain some traction with voters, especially in the corn-growing states like Iowa. Now, this is due to the complex history around the issue and the clear desire of the industry for more support in terms of driving demand for biofuels. On the positive side, the Trump administration's proposals for bio-blending requirements are intended to compensate farmers for the administration's expanded use of refinery waivers. However, they may simply not go far enough in the eyes of most farmers, according to Reuters. And on this point, Biofuels Digest notes that anything short of full reallocation of the 4 billion gallons of biofuel demand destroyed, in addition to the significant amount of blending of renewable fuels, as well as stepped-up investment in second-generation renewable fuels, will continue to leave farm country in economic distress, according to the Biofuels Digest. Okay, one issue with this is that the greater linkage of agriculture to biofuels, that means that the sector's more susceptible to fluctuating energy prices, and that's not a good thing. This means that biofuel or rural energy-related policies could end up having a wider impact than really were intended. Okay, in summary, both Biden and Trump propose a different number of policies to assist the agriculture and rural sector, with Trump proposing more detailed policies in many areas. Biden's primary strength is in the area of biofuels and sustainability in agriculture. While ethanol is extremely important to corn growers and other growers like wheat, tree fruit, and association, they just probably don't think it's as important. Now, Trump's policies are more clear-cut, but may have more short-term negative impacts than positive. Okay, that's a lot. Let's end it there. If you want to get these videos as soon as they're released, click on the subscribe button and sign up. If you want to learn more about the 2020 election and policies, click on the video below, and I'll see you in the next one.